Hi everyone, this is Adam Voll with Ashling Partners, and today we're going to do a refresher on RPA testing with UiPaths Test Suite. Test Suite was introduced in the 2020.4 release of UiPath and was improved upon in 2020.10. I can only imagine more features and functionality are to come in the next major version release because it's a very handy tool, very popular. Automated testing is integral in the software development lifecycle. And there's a lot of cool things you can do. So today we're going to go through creating and managing test cases in Studio Pro. We're going to learn how to improve our code coverage percentage. We're going to go over mock testing activities, which is very handy in Studio Pro. And then we're going to publish our test cases into Orchestrator, and we're going to execute our test sets from there, which will show how that can help transition ownership from the development team onto the center of excellence of the business when it comes to automated testing, so that they can feel more confident and more in control as we're promoting code from dev into UAT into production. And then lastly, we're going to touch a little bit on CICD integrations with Azure DevOps and Jenkins pipelines. So without further ado, I'm just going to bring up a couple of quick workflows that I made to demonstrate this functionality. First one is just a quick dispatcher where all we do is log into the UI Bank application in Google Chrome. We're going to download some transaction data into a shared file location, and then we're going to log into a SQL table via a stored procedure that I created in a library which I published. So in this particular instance, we have two new folders. One is called mocks and one is called tests. You can see our test cases all live here. They're either gray or blue. That just means publishable or not. And simply put, if this is disabled and you publish your test cases into Orchestrator, they will be ignored. You might have a very handy test case that's only for development purposes only. This would be a good example to have it disabled, but if you want it to go into Orchestrator so that it can be triggered to run on the testing machines, which we provision with the license for Test Manager, we can do that, and you can publish your test cases the same way you would publish a normal package. So when we look at these test cases, we're going to notice that they have three major buckets, and they are given, when, and then. That's going to be the format of every single test case you make. A lot of us were doing this manually anyway, but it's really great that they are now built into Studio Pro, and the even cooler part is that, yes, in given, you'll initialize your applications, fill out your arguments, and prime for the workflow that you're invoking. But when you invoke that workflow, it's actually not going to be calling your XAML itself. It's going to call this mock workflow that it was auto-created when you make a test case. And it does follow the folder path convention of the project. So if it's framework, init, applications, it's going to go mocks, framework, init, framework, init, and then the test case themselves, when you call them, will not be affecting the main workflow, and it still shows the same code coverage, which we'll get to in a second. The test activities pack, which you need to have in order to run what I'm about to show you, is available as a dependency, and with it come these activities. To verify the outputs of your test scenario, you might want a login to fail on purpose in order to pass the test case. You might want it to be actually successful, and you're going to want to play out both scenarios. One other thing that's really cool is you can drop a test file of an Excel full of as many rows as you want to iterate through test case after test case after test case in order to improve your code coverage in one test case all on its own. Or you can run multiple test cases to show your code coverage that way. So there's multiple ways you can do it. Just like there's multiple ways you can verify the output. So in this one, it's a simple verify expression. You have verify expression with operator, same thing. A few pre-selected operators ready and available for you to use there. The coolest one probably, and I'll get to this in another test case, is the verify control attribute, which allows you to literally take an activity and verify the output of said activity with those operators and those expressions. It's really handy for selector where you want to validate that the value that was returned actually matches up with a variable that you provide. If you're doing calculations in an automation or an API call, that might be something that due to that activity's output, you can validate whether your test case is going to pass or not. So I'll show that actually in another workflow, or another test case, sorry. So for now, I want to show running a couple of these. I'm going to debug actually the test case for UI Bank login. I want it to succeed, and that will be the success criteria for my test case. And we're going to look at our code coverage when it's finished. We can see that the login was successful and that the validation passed because the Boolean variable did return true in my verify expression. And we can see that I accomplished 87% test coverage. Why 87%? You open up the workflow that we just tested, and you can see the path that it took. I just didn't cover this log message activity. Login failed because it was successful. So 87% is good. Generally want to be over 80%, but if I have OCD and I'm crazy, I might just create a test scenario to cover the other side of the equation. So I run that. And as expected in my validation step, the login did fail. The verification passed because I wanted it to exist, and I was validating that the login failed element was indeed true. So even though it's a fail, test cases pass. I'm still at 87%. Why? Oh, I didn't cover the one on the left now. I didn't cover the success. So how do I do that? There are two ways. You can drop that data file that will loop through the Excel rows in order to test the success scenario and the fail. And when you're doing that, you can surround your activities with a mock. And this is a really good way to invoke the behavior that you're trying to make without updating the code itself. So in not the actual XAML, but the mock XAML, you can surround an activity, and I'll just copy this activity and show you how to put it inside of a mock, surround with mock. Paste it right here. So if you want to break this selector or mandate a fail for a test scenario that you want to fail, you can do this with a mock activity. And under the properties of such activity, you can drop you can drop in whatever you want and break the selector and make it fail automatically. So that when it goes through there, if you want it to fail, you'll be able to do that there without issue. And then if you were to have updated your root file, you can go to your mocks and hit synchronize mocks so that you're always working with the latest source version of the XAML file that you're testing against. And that way your mocks stay true to form with your tests as you evolve the code. You can do that as a sanity check to ensure that every update you make still passes your test that you set up. And the caveat here is that an automated test is only as good as the developer who writes it. You can make tests that succeed every time. You can make tests that fail every time. You can cover 100% of code with crappy tests. You can do a really good thorough test that covers a very low percentage of code, which is not good. So you're going to want to find that happy medium of effective, resilient tests that are significant and will scale over time, and ideally can be used across components. I have a dispatcher here. I have a performer that might perform some of these same activities. These test sets are already made for me, so when I'm doing that performer, I just have the test sets already created. I implement them there, and I can already pre-built automatically see how much of my code that I'm covering. So I'm still at 87% here was where I was going with that. How do I get to 100 just to make sure? Can debug your test cases together. So this will kick off the fail and the success. It's kicking off the fail first, so we're going to watch it go through, log in, it's going to fail, and it's going to log the message on the right. We're going to be at 87%. Login failed, validation passed. Now we're testing the success variant of this, stepping through the same code, walking through, cover, and success on the right. We've now covered 100% of our code through the use of these two tests, which each independently are 87%, but we've covered 100% of our code. You can do the same thing with what I would call our collection of smoke tests for this application. So we're going to do init, and we're going to add the DB connection test in there as well to make sure that on the VMs that we're about to go to for UAT or for production, we can connect to the database, service account has access, so we're going to run that as well. Trigger these together. Okay, and now we've executed our smoke test from within Studio Pro. Everything's looking good. We're above 80% across the board. This looks like something that I would be happy and ready to push across into Orchestrator so that we can move towards the next steps of UAT. I just want to quickly touch base on libraries and how test scenarios really do come in handy there. I often found myself creating manual test scenarios in the project itself, or creating a dummy process on the side to validate the inputs and outputs of libraries that I made. And but what's awesome now is that you can build in a test case right inside your code, right inside your project. You can set your given when then, verify in this case that I'm just connected to the database, and then you can inside your library pass it whatever you want. This would probably be a really good case for a data file where you're just inserting and make sure that it's a resilient library that no matter what you throw at it, it's going to work and it's going to do well. So if we debug this test file, see our code coverage there, looking good as well. And now if I pull the library down later, test case is already built in. I can trigger this test case from inside Orchestrator because I've published it there. And I can always tell that when I'm going live to a new VM, or if we spin up a new instance, or if we're upgrading to new infrastructure, that the service account will have access from where it's going, and that there's no environmental variables that we need to isolate. So these test cases, along with mocking, come really handy in removing environment-related variables from the equation and allow you to just focus your testing efforts solely on the code itself. And often cases we find ourselves in a scenario where we're affecting production, or we only have production to work with for an older application. So we don't want to write to a database, we don't want to call an API, or maybe we already have a sample API output from production. We don't need to get that body from a dev environment. We can preset the givens and invoke our code that way to make sure that we're covered from all scenarios. Makes it really easy to debug. So I want to also open up Orchestrator and execute some of these test sets from there. Inside of the modern folder, you will see a testing tab with some subtabs. You got test sets, test cases, executions, schedules, and data queues. The test cases are all the things that we made and published from Orchestrator. And what we have now is the ability, just like pulling down a package and making it an automation under a folder, we can make a test set full of our test cases. So I've already made one. 3 out of the 4 publishes I'm grabbing. Each of these had a few test cases inside, some were updated, but I don't want this one. I don't care about that one. So I go next, and inside of what I've selected, I can pick either some or all. It doesn't matter where they come from, but if it's part of my smoke test, I can include it there. If it's part of my regression test, I can include it over there. Any set of tests that I want to execute on the VM, I can group together as a user, and I can trigger these just like a job. So now that's going to be running. Skip ahead a bit, and now you can see that this test execution has passed. You can look inside and view the details, and inside of any execution you can go view the logs as you usually would to verify the steps that happen inside of your test cases. You can schedule these with a regular trigger just as you would a normal automation, and you can make a data queue as you normally would, but you can have a test data set passed to a queue and a test data set consumed from a queue, which makes it really nice for passing back and forth between two different situations. So that's how you would monitor that there. And you don't have to be the developer to kick these off. If you know your smoke test and you know your regression test, the COE can do this, the business unit owner can do it, application owner, BA, and this gives them a lot of confidence in being involved in the software development lifecycle, signing off on good code going to production, and updating their Jira tickets or Azure DevOps work items if they need to. Which, speaking of, the CICD pipeline portion of this, we do have the same integrations for Azure DevOps pipelines and Jenkins. If you go to Ashling's YouTube, it's touched on in a webinar we hosted from a couple of videos back for some working examples. But the same way that you can package and integrate for a regular process or library using those integrations, you can do for your test set. So you can make a mandatory passing of a certain set of tests before you're able to promote to the next Git branch or promote into production, and so on and so forth. So for customers who are tied into CI/CD and who value it, which is a lot and increasingly more, this is going to be a huge component and a great advantage of having Test Suite integrated from the onset of your automation journey. Last but not least, just want to do a couple real-life customer case studies of a couple different companies, Company A and Company B, who are at very different phases of their automation journey. Company A is quite established. They have a good amount of automations. They're just ready for a UiPath upgrade, and they haven't done it in a few versions. So what we're putting on a new infrastructure. So what we're going to want to do is take those packages from the one environment, regression test them manually at this point, because this is without Test Suite integrated, the left column. And you're going to be manually testing each one. You're going to be pushing it to production, monitoring, probably some hypercare. And currently, is already a pretty high hypercare scenario, because when things do happen, we have to get developers involved and handle it that way. So imagine the next upgrade does have Test Suite integrated. This regression test the first time around, it's a one-time effort, but because we've done it this time, we publish to the new Orchestrator, we can run those tests on the new virtual machines, and we can ensure that the applications initialize, that all the regression tests pass, and then if we can involve that in our UAT session to get sign off on the change request before we deploy, and hopefully see a lot less hypercare. Additionally, the bottom row, code coverage without Test Suite, you can test a bunch of scenarios, you can have your test steps set, but you're not going to know exactly how much code you've covered. This is no longer a mystery. You can know the exact percentage when you have these automated tests in place. Company B is at the beginning of their automation journey. They don't have any RPA processes, but we're doing a POC. They're very established in Azure DevOps, and they have a large dev team that's very integrated with Git, CICD pipelines, and they want to absolutely fit RPA into that software development lifecycle. They want to tie it to a pipeline, and they want to push packages in a continuous and automated fashion. So if you look at this on the left column without having Test Suite involved, It's not going to satisfy some of their minimum requirements. It would leave RPA kind of siloed as a one-off that doesn't get into the automated CI/CD portion of their workflow, which takes man hours off of the development itself and puts it on to managing the code and publishing and all that. So with a one-time effort, if you do have Test Suite integrated, create your test cases, integrate to Jenkins or Azure DevOps, in this case Azure DevOps, using those pipeline integrations. You have consistent testing, thorough testing. It's going to embolden confidence in the client. They're going to want to do more automation, and they're going to be able to visualize those test metrics with higher level executive teams, which that's always what you want when you're trying to get more automation involved at the client level. So thank you very much for this quick walkthrough of RPA testing with UiPath Test Suite. If you have any questions or you want to explore more, you can visit us at ashlingpartners.com or find us in the Diamond Partners section of the UiPath portal. Thanks a lot and have a great day.